Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. This portrait of a well groomed man, not a hair on his head or beard out of place, and meticulously dressed in a tailored pinstripe suit and a military hat with a star attached to one side, well, it tells a story. He sits ramrod straight in the photographer's studio chair, leaning slightly forward and perhaps leaving an impression he's a man on the move, a gentleman with places to go and people to see. Some might think of him as a tightly wound character, and yet it may also be that the pose is the result of his being uncomfortable in front of the camera, or that the photographer simply instructed him to pay attention to his posture and sit up straight. Fortunately, this photograph includes evidence that helps us to know who he is and to explain the hat he holds. Let's start with the format of this photograph. It's a French import known as the Cartes-de-visite, also known in America as a card photograph. It tells us something about our sitter. Card photographs, about the size of a modern baseball card and wildly popular, coincident with the beginning of the Civil War. These images were the Facebook of the 1860s. They were purchased by the dozen and given away to family, friends, comrades, and other admirers. They were widely collected. Our sitter likely chose the style instead of a tintype or an ambrotype. Those are the artisan one of a kind portraits on plates of iron or tin. Those were more appropriate for the mantle, the bookshelf, or a bedroom table rather than for public consumption. The carte de visite phenomenon resulted in, among other developments, photograph albums. You had to have some place to store these images that you were collecting, and many of those collectors organized them into unique groupings: family and friends, political, military, and religious leaders, authors, artists, and actors. If you served in the army during the war, an album of your comrades, company officers, regimental commanders, fleshed out with the flag of your regiment and the likeness of the president and commander in chief, would be something that you might do. But these are just a few of the popular groupings. The variations are endless. These first collectors often recorded the name and or the subject of the image in the album on a special numbered index page conveniently located in the beginning of the album. Over time, the vast majority of these albums disappeared, and with it, we lost the memories of how the first collectors visually cataloged their world. The elements, fire, earth, air, and water, consumed many, some after being unceremoniously dumped into the trash. Other albums continued in service as collectors updated them with new images or passed a used album to a friend or an acquaintance to fill with other groupings of images. Some number of albums remained intact and were preserved just as the original contents were put together. These albums, those that managed to escape destruction, either remain with families as cherished mementos or made their way to garage sales, flea markets, antique shops, antique shows, a physical or an online auction, and eventually into the hands of a dealer, a collector, or someone who's just curious about these old photographs. Some of these surviving albums that landed in the hands of dealers are remarkably intact and in original condition, and others are in various states of preservation, depending upon all the factors I've mentioned. Dealers may offer these albums for sale as is, fully intact, or break them up and sell them individually. It all depends upon the condition and the completeness of the album, as well as financial considerations. Most of the dealers who decide to sell images individually follow cultural norms of the community, the selling community, and they preserve as much information as they can. In this case, the dealer preserved the album's index page. On this page is that crucial information that reveals this man's identity and his purpose. I'm going to share a sliver of the line of that index page. It's line 23, and on it is written AJ Mabbott, sutler, 123rd New York Volunteers. Now, there's support for this identification, and it's provided by the sitter himself. Let's take a look at the back of the card. This on it is written in a pencil, an inscription, yours, AJ Mabbott. The photographer has also helped us. He's provided a clue by including his imprint on the card. Morse and Peasley, Gallery of the Cumberland, 25 Cedar Street, opposite the Commercial Hotel, Nashville, Tennessee. Also appearing at the top of the card is a negative number, 974. Now, this is a subtle reminder to Mabbott or any sitter that should he or she desire more prints of the portrait, they can order them directly from the photographers who will pull the glass plate with the corresponding number and make a bunch of prints, thereby fulfilling the order. An item we do not see on the back of the card is also worthy of note. There's no tax stamp. These were affixed to photographs produced between August of 1864 and August of 1866. Congress, with the support of the President, Abraham Lincoln, levied the tax to pay for an extraordinarily expensive war. The lack of this stamp dates the photograph to no later than August of 1864. Now, let's turn our attention back to Mr. Mabbott. The basics of his life are readily available through the popular genealogical sites that I talk about often, Ancestry and Find a Grave, with additional details from newspapers.com. Here's the short version. Born Abraham Joseph Mabbott, AJ, in 1837 at Granville in Washington County, New York. He was one of 5 children. He and his family relocated to Sandy Springs in Maryland, 20 miles due north of the heart of Washington, D.C., sometime before his father's death in 1853 at the relatively young age of 40. Why exactly the Mabbotts moved from the Empire State to a suburb of the Washington, D.C. area is not precisely known. I haven't found out that bit of information yet. However, the place to which they moved in Sandy Springs is revealing. The settlement where they located is part of the Society of Friends. The Mabbotts, in fact, were Quakers. And as such, they were opposed to violence and war. Looking back at Mabbott's portraits in civilian dress and holding a military hat, it speaks to the tensions prompted by the war to those who celebrated the Quaker faith. Some of these Quakers broke with tradition and their families and enlisted in the Army and Navy. Others found ways to support the war effort while honoring their beliefs. And we can put Mabbott in this class. That is, with a caveat, while Mabbott supported the war effort as a sutler, he also earned a living, and, judging from that pinstripe suit, enough of a living to afford fine clothes. Now, let's touch briefly on sutlers. You students of the Civil War know that sutlers played a significant role during hostilities as the purveyors of non-military goods to the troops, selling a variety of provisions, all the fancy foods and fineries a soldier could not get from his quartermaster or commissary officer. Setting up shop inside and outside of army posts and encampments, and working out of tents, wagons, huts, cabins, or any other shelter. Some of these sutlers had their own store tokens to promote their business. The most respected and appreciated sutlers catered to their clients' needs charging prices to cover the cost of bringing in the goods and making a fair profit. On the flip side, those who took advantage of their virtual monopolies to price gouge and take advantage of provoked the ire of many a soldier. And then there were those sutlers who engaged in vice, gambling, and prostitution, to name a couple. They were frowned upon by the honest, clean living soldier who clung to his faith and moral values. Considering Mabbett's likeness and that it was in an album connected to a Union regiment, and also factoring in his Quaker ways, it is fair to label him as an honest broker. At least I found no evidence that he broke any laws or was involved in any wrongdoing. During the war years, Mabbett's name appears in Washington newspapers on lists of DC hotel arrivals between June and September of 1863. Such lists in newspapers were helpful to guests on business in the city who wanted to announce their presence to a wider audience. It also helped out the hotels as an advertisement, and it helped out the newspapers who were covering the latest local developments. I found four mentions of Mabbott, one identifying him as a resident of the United States, another as a resident of New York, and two more that connected him to the hat he holds in his portrait. It said next to his, or the listing in the hotel directory said, AJ Mabbott, 12th Corps. Now, originally formed in March of 1862 as one of the five original corps in the Army of the Potomac, the 12th did not become officially designated as the 12th until September of 1862, the same month that a new regiment destined for the 12th Corps mustered into service for a 3-year enlistment. You guessed it, the 123rd New York Volunteers. The regiment happened to be recruited in Washington County, the birthplace of Mabbott. Did Mabbott find out about the regiment's formation from friends and family back in New York? Did he learn about the 123rd while he was in Sandy Springs, or perhaps on business in Washington while the New Yorkers were passing through on their way to be assigned to the 12th Corps and put into the field? However he found out, we don't know. But did it test his Quaker faith? We don't know that either. Did he struggle with violating his beliefs? We don't have answers yet. But what we do know, we know this about Mabbott. By June 1863, a month after the 123rd fought its first battle at Chancellorsville, Mabbott had a military connection, as evidenced by his name on the hotel lists associating him with the 12th Corps. This identification is also supported by the star on his hat. That's the red star that was the badge of the 12th Corps. Mabbett's hotel stays during the summer of 1863 suggest a pattern that while he was working as a sutler, he was shuttling back and forth from the encampments of the 123rd to Washington to resupply goods for the men. They were off fighting at the Battle of Gettysburg and afterwards participating in the pursuit of General Robert E. Lee's defeated Army of Northern Virginia as it retreated back to its base of operations in Virginia. In September of 1863, the War Department dispatched the 123rd and the rest of the 12th Corps to Tennessee to reinforce Major General William S. Rosecrans and his Army of the Cumberland. That date, September 1863, happens to be the last time I found his name on the DC hotel list. This suggests that he left with the 123rd for Tennessee about this time or at some point soon afterward. Supporting this theory is the photographer's Nashville imprint on the back of the Cartes-de-visite. Remember, it's Nashville, Tennessee. This establishes that he followed the boys of the 123rd as they moved west. Now, how long Mabbott remained with the 123rd after its arrival? Well, that's also a bit of a mystery. His portrait suggests that Nashville became his new supply base as early as September of 63 and as late as August of 1864, when Congress levied that tax stamp to raise revenue. During this time period, there's two items of note. In April 1864, the 12th Corps and a brother corps, the 11th, were consolidated into the new 20th Corps, which adopted the star as its badge. If the 20th Corps had adopted a different corps badge at the consolidation, the time frame for Mabbett's portrait would be cut in half from September 1863 until April of 1864 instead of September 1863 to August 1864. That is, assuming he followed protocol. The other note, when Atlanta fell on September 2nd, 1864, the 123rd marched in the vanguard of Union forces that occupied the city. An anecdote in the regimental history notes that the men reveled in the tobacco that was available, noting that they had been without it for a long time. This may suggest that Mabbott, in fact, did not accompany them on the Atlanta campaign, or maybe he did, but he couldn't keep tobacco in stock. Another mystery is whether Mabbott accompanied the regiment after the conclusion of the Atlanta campaign on the March to the Sea and the Carolinas campaign before it marched in the Grand Review in Washington and mustered out in June of 1865. At that time, the men and officers of the 123rd melted back into society. And of course, they remembered in reunions and in other gatherings their corps commanders, including Generals Henry W. Slocum and Alpheus S. Williams. The regimental history of the 123rd, published in 1879, by the way, makes no mention of Mabbott or mentions a sutler. But we do know what became of Mabbott after the dawn of peace in 1865. He returned to Maryland and reunited with his wife, Annie, and a son, Edwin. There were more children, all daughters, 3. They were born to the Mabbetts. Evidence suggests that Mabbott was involved in several partnerships, including a veterinary surgeon's clinic and a hotel, before making his name in the steam laundry business. Mabbett's Empire Steam Laundry in Baltimore, which with other large-scale factory model facilities in major cities across the country, well, they were reshaping the cleaning world. Mammoth boilers powered by steam and other machinery posed safety risks for employees. Mabbott was a member of the National Laundrymen's Association, and he did his part to advance the budding industry. However, his lifespan, like his father's, was shorter than average. He died in 1893 at age 57 of Bright's disease. His wife, Annie, and 3 children survived him. Also surviving is this photograph, picturing Mabbott as a Quaker sutler connected to the 123rd New York Infantry and the 12th Corps of the Army of the Potomac and the Army of the Cumberland. But thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.